Several members of the national media think the Auburn Tigers could be the surprise team of the SEC.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Blackerby, and thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. And of course, Locked On Auburn is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Zach Blackerby, Lindsay, Crosby of AuburnDaily.com, and a bunch of other places here on the Monday edition of the show. We'll talk about Jarquez Hunter being the only first-teamer on the preseason SEC teams as voted by the media at media days. We disagree with that. We'll also talk about where Auburn finished as far as the voting goes. I don't know. Lindsay, it doesn't line up. It doesn't line up with what our first topic today is going to be. And throughout the week, I had several members of the national media come up to me and say, hey, when I'm asked who the surprise team is in the SEC this year, I'm saying Auburn. I think you guys, talking to me specifically, I think you're covering a really interesting team this year. Then they proceeded to ask my thoughts on the roster and the situation. And Lindsay, I went on several shows at media days last week in Dallas, and they asked about Auburn. And there's several things that we just don't know the answer to because we don't know if Peyton Thorne is going to take that next step. We don't know if the transition of offensive mindset from Philip Montgomery to Hugh Freeze / Derek Nix is going to garner this massive step that we think it possibly could. But the bottom line here is there are a million reasons why Auburn should be better this year than they were a year ago. We just have to wait to see if all of these reasons actually stack up. But people outside of Auburn are starting to pay attention to those.
Yeah, my first reaction is I really hope you guys got in there when we told you to take the over. Because the line's been low all off season, right? And we were saying Auburn's going to be better than this.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a big thing because Auburn, perhaps for not warranted, but Auburn has gotten this reputation as a place that's been dysfunctional. And because of that, I feel like nobody ever really paid the proper attention to these players and what they can do. And now that you have that mythical alignment, now that you have a coach that actually understands recruiting, now that you have better play callers, you have talent at positions you've been deficient before, like wide receiver. Now we have a chance to see what Auburn should have been for a long time and can be. And I'm excited because, one, I want you to be proven right. I want all these big wigs to understand that Zach Blackerby knows ball. We know that. I want them to know that.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. But also, this is where Auburn should have been for a long time. This is where Auburn has the capability of being, is a team that gets respect nationally among ball knowers and can go out there and hang with almost everybody on the football field, especially at home. I'm excited for it. I'm excited for everybody to see what Auburn can be when things work out correctly.
Right. And we talked about this over the last month or so, where it's like members of the national media, it's like they finally sat down and looked at the schedule and they're like, oh, Auburn's schedule is more manageable this year than it has been in a long time. It's like, yeah, we've been talking about that since the schedule dropped here on Locked On Auburn. But Peyton Thorne making the rounds at Radio Row and then talking to folks at, the podiums and the electronic media room and all these stops that he made, that is the car wash of SEC media days. I think he won some folks over. And I think the way he presented himself was kind of what Daryl and I said he needed to do earlier last week, where it wasn't cocky or arrogant, but it was like controlled confidence. He wasn't loud. He wasn't aggressive, but he was very firm in his responses. He was very slow to speak because he was thinking about what his response should be. And to me, I think everything he said was calculated in the sense of, I know where I'm at now versus a year ago is in such a better spot because of my receivers, because of just the nature of being at a place going into a second year. It's so weird to me, Lindsay, that all last year, a big storyline, including the Heisman Trophy winner to several guys throughout the SEC and all of college football, is the second-year transfers benefited from being at their new school for an extra season. And for some reason, Peyton Thorne isn't being talked about like that, like Bo Nix, like Jaden Daniels. Just the benefit of being at your school for an extra season, an extra off season, is crucial. And look, it's this new era of college football. The transfer portal still new, but with this small sample size that we have, we've seen this dramatic jump from first-year transfers to second-year transfers across all of college football. And for some reason, we don't want to apply that expectation to Peyton Thorne. I don't know why, but I think Peyton Thorne, it's like a flip has switched, man. This guy seems so much more, he seems so much cooler, more confident. And I think he knows, or at least feels really good about what's about to happen in his offense this season.
I think it's easy to kind of understand why, again, a national media person who hasn't had a ton of time would not give the benefit of the doubt to Peyton Thorne when you look at statistically what he did last year versus some of those other first-year transfer quarterbacks. Now, obviously, like you alluded to, there's a lot of things that went into a bad situation or a less than ideal situation for Peyton Thorne last year with the offensive line, the lack of talent at wide receiver, the play calling, all of that. And we fixed that. And then also, he was one of those transfers that didn't get spring practice.
Correct.
And I think that's a big thing I talk about all the time. I think
huge.
People just underestimate the whole chemistry aspect when it comes to quarterbacks and wide receivers and knowing what that dude's going to do on any given play. So I think that's a big part of it people don't pay attention to. But Auburn, when it comes to offensive production, that's not running game, right? So quarterback play, wide receiver play, passing game in general.
Sure.
Auburn's not going to get the benefit of the doubt from national media because Auburn doesn't have an amazing legacy of excelling at that aspect of offense, right? If this was a running back and they said, hey, whatever transfer running back didn't do great in his first year at Auburn, but like that second year, he's going to pop. Like you would understand because Auburn's made some great running backs, but I see why they didn't believe in Peyton Thorne or give him the benefit of the doubt. But like you said, now they're starting to realize, oh no, actually no, this dude's ready for year two. He's got that. He's on the good side of the confidence, cockiness line there. And he's going to surprise a lot of people. And it's because of all of those factors we mentioned, getting that extra fall, getting the extra spring practice, getting the summer acclimation throwing periods and things like that. I'm excited to see what Peyton Thorne does this year.
Yeah, I mean, Peyton Thorne came on this show a few weeks after he transferred. I think this was the first show that he came on.
Because he obviously understands who knows ball. Good job, Zach.
Sure. Lucked into that one. But that conversation versus the conversation I had with him on Friday's show. If you missed it, go check it out. It's just a totally different guy, Lindsay. It's a totally different dude. And the system around him is totally, I mean, at that point, he hadn't thrown in an official practice to anyone. They've done some organized stuff and some OTAs and some team activities and things like that and workouts over the summer, but he hadn't done like actual practice yet. And now this guy's got a full season under his belt. He's got a spring under his belt. And he's got a real relationship with Hugh Freeze and hopefully Derek Nix. The way he talked about Derek Nix made it seem like they hit the ground running as far as, camaraderie and trust, which is exactly what you want. But to me, it's different. And so it seems like more and more members of the national media, they're buying what Auburn is starting to sell. But there's still a disconnect, Lindsay, because it doesn't add up to how they voted. So let's discuss that in just a moment, right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Lindsay, can you imagine wagering on any other sportsbook?
I would never. I can't.
No, you can't.
No.
You can't. Right now, Auburn's win total is still at 7.5. You hinted at it earlier in the show, Lindsay.
Pound the over.
I am urging you. That number is about to go up. So when you talk about value proposition in a sports book, right now, betting the over for the Auburn Tigers is the way to go. It's the way to go. I'm thinking 8-4. It seems like a lot of the folks that I talked to throughout the media are thinking 8-4. Regardless, head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. They've got something new for all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something new for everyone every day all summer long. So FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball and the Locked On Podcast Network. So folks can come up to me and say, yes, Auburn is my surprise team in the SEC. But if they don't vote that way, it leads to the question of, do you really think that, or are you just saying it? So the SEC put out the compiled poll, the projected order to finish by SEC media that were in Dallas for media days last week. Of course, Georgia, Texas, and Alabama are the top three. I'm actually surprised Texas is above Alabama. I'm curious to see if that's the amount of Texas media. I don't know, but there's a pretty big divide that had Georgia and Texas in a sizable drop up until they get to Alabama. Ole Miss is at 4, which makes sense. Then I'm just going to go through LSU, Missouri, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, then a pretty decent drop to where we get to Auburn, which is 10th. Auburn is voted to finish 10th in the SEC by the SEC media, ahead of Kentucky, Florida, South Carolina, Arkansas, Mississippi State, and Vanderbilt. So this is important because Auburn is voted to finish ahead of Kentucky, Arkansas, and Vanderbilt, which are 3 SEC teams that they do play this season. And if you think Auburn goes 4-0, they're non-conference, you're at 7-5 if that is true. Right ahead of you is Texas A&M, which you host, And then, Missouri is way up there because opinions are all over the place on Missouri. Some people have them as a college football playoff contender. Some people think they're going to revert back to the norm that is Missouri football. Both arguments, extremely doable. You can make the argument for both. But regardless, Auburn being ahead of Kentucky, Arkansas, and Vandy makes sense to me. I don't hate where Auburn is in this list. I'm going to be honest. I forgot to vote. I just totally forgot, was so busy. And then I was going to vote on Thursday and my travel plans got nuked. But thank goodness it was before everything, while I was still able to have a flight because nobody was able to fly the next day. But to me, I don't think I would have voted anything different. I think this list is solid. I think it's rock solid, Lindsay. But I think Auburn, when it comes down to it, will beat Texas A&M, who's projected to finish 1 spot ahead of them because their schedule is cake. I still think Auburn can finish ahead of them or at least beat Texas A&M when it's all said and done.
2 spots above Auburn, just to point this out. A good little jump in points, but Oklahoma. So it's like Auburn, A&M, Oklahoma. I found that interesting as well. 2 teams you host. It's that next tier going up. Yeah. They're at the bottom of that next tier there. It's an interesting poll. I do think there's more maybe predictive power in that than there is in the SEC champion poll. 2 votes for Vanderbilt, a vote for South Carolina.
Sure.
Down bad. Only 2 votes for LSU, which seems surprising. But, either way, it was well and away Georgia. It's hard to find fault with the positioning of Auburn on this. I'm kind of with you there. And if I think about it, I don't really know where I put Auburn unless I just assume the A&M game is a win and move them up 1 spot. I think at best,
but the way,
Lindsay,
the way A&M scheduled in conference, they play Notre Dame, which is interesting. They'll probably lose that game. But as far as how this poll applies, it's just conference games. A&M can lose to Auburn and still finish ahead of them in the conference. And which I think is very realistic, just because Auburn plays Alabama and Georgia and Missouri all on the road. I don't think it's anything against Auburn. They also play Oklahoma. So to me, I think I don't think it's crazy to say that A&M can finish ahead of Auburn like this poll projects, but Auburn still beats A&M, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, and Arkansas, which is then if you take care of business against Cal, you're 8-4. And I think for the most part, the Auburn fan base is happy with that.
Yeah, I think you're happy with 8-4. One, if you use FanDuel, you're cashing. You love that.
Correct.
But can you imagine going somewhere else for that? I would not.
I can't. Can't imagine it.
But yeah, 8-4. I think if you show the competitiveness in those 4 other games, right? If at any point in those games you have a chance to win it and you just come up short, you finish 8-4, that's absolutely not only a winning season, obviously statistically, but like in the eyes of the Auburn fan base based on where you were the last couple seasons. So yeah, I don't really think I'd change this. I don't really think I'd make any changes. Auburn's at the top of that tier.
I don't hate it. I don't hate the order at all.
No.
There are some teams that I think Auburn is in the same tier as, or like, I don't know if we're necessarily like appropriately rating this. Oklahoma's farther down than I thought they would be, but it's where I would vote them. I thought Oklahoma across the conference was seen a little too high. And according to this list, that's not true.
You thought they were getting they would get more respect than they did.
Yeah. I mean, Ole Miss, LSU, Mizzou, Tennessee, Oklahoma, A&M, Auburn, like that's, I don't hate that order. I really don't hate the pecking order of that. Now, why is A&M getting more love than Auburn? I mean, I hate to be skeptical of this, but I mean, did everybody who voted this know that A&M's schedule is way easier than Auburn's, and that's why they voted it that way? Like, probably not, based on the conversations I had with folks this past week. Like, probably not, but whatever. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that's why A&M is voted ahead of Auburn right now. But to me, so like this goes back to what we've been talking about, where, okay, let's assume Kentucky is a win.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at your toss-up games of Oklahoma at home, Texas A&M at home, and Missouri on the road. And as long as Auburn doesn't go 0-3 in those games, and they take care of business outside of that, it's a successful season. You just can't go 0-3 in those games that are all in this tier that you just pointed out. That Texas A&M's 1 spot ahead of you, Oklahoma's 2 spots ahead of you, and Missouri's 4 spots ahead of you. You just got to take care of business and beat one of those teams, and all of a sudden you're in that tier, and we're all good to go. Yeah. Which I think happens. I don't think Auburn goes 0-3 in those. Auburn will win one of those 3 games.
I do have to ask if Kentucky is within 10 points of Auburn at 1,382 points at 1,371. Is it appropriate to put Kentucky into that group and say you have to go and say it's a 4-team tier rather than just chalking that up to a win for Auburn?
Sure. I don't think it's outlandish at all. Kentucky's schedule: South Carolina, Georgia, Ohio, Ole Miss, Vanderbilt, at Florida, Auburn, at Tennessee, at Texas. Like, that's tough. Like, they're not going to. Yeah,
it's not easy.
They'll beat I'll give them South Carolina. It's in Lexington. They lose to Georgia. They lose to Ole Miss. They lose at Florida. The next week they play Auburn at home. I think they lose that. They lose at Tennessee. They lose at Texas. Like, Kentucky's schedule is brutal. It's brutal. It's not a talent thing. It's just they're going to be beat up by the time they host Auburn because they'll get beat up at the Swamp the week before.
I was about to say, here's what's interesting is they are ahead of Florida in that poll, and they're ahead by a couple hundred points. And is that Florida at home?
Though, yeah, I mean, a national narrative has been, wow, Napier has a tough hand, because I don't think Florida from a talent standpoint is awful, but it's going to look way worse than it is because they have one of the hardest schedules ever. It's insane why Florida signed up for the situation that they're in. But to me, like the whole obsession and devotion to being able to play Miami and FSU while also having to play that SEC schedule is just insane. It's insane. I think they kind of got a little prideful and all that, but whatever. So I think that's why Florida's so low.
And
if everybody
UCF.
had the same level of schedule, and UCF, which why would they agree to do that? Why would they agree to do that? But whatever. Shout out to Gus. Maybe he wins that one. That'd be crazy. Because that's going to be UCF Super Bowl. And it's just another game for Florida. Like, why would you sign up for that?
Can you imagine your non-conference matchups being at Florida State, home for UCF, and home versus Miami, and then Samford? Like, that is the hardest schedule in the nation. I hadn't really looked at that until you said something. That's the hardest schedule in the nation.
It's historically brutal. Has nothing to do with Florida. And everybody's like, Billy Napier's on the hot team. Like, I don't think so. I don't think you can fire him from that.
They go to Texas. Georgia's neutral site, but they go to Texas.
They've got a 6-game stretch at the end of their schedule that's just unbelievable.
Oh my God. This is, home for Kentucky, neutral against Georgia, at Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, at Florida State. Holy cow.
It's like, what are you
Napier's.
I don't think you can fire him after that. I just don't, but we'll see.
Ball knowers can't. People may call for it, but ball knowers know you can't fire Napier for that.
They got the money to do it, but we'll see if they do it or not. But regardless, Auburn comes in at 10th. I don't hate it. They're right on the cusp of shooting up to 6 or 7. They just got to win the right games, and I think they can do it. I think they can do it going into this season. The media did whiff on parts of this SEC Media Days poll. We'll discuss on that in just a moment, right here on Locked On Auburn. Auburn had one lone player on the SEC first team. And while I'm surprised, Jarquez Hunter should be an SEC first teamer going into the season. I have no pushback to that. In fact, Lindsay, I was asked last week on Matt Moscona's show down in Baton Rouge. He's also the host of Locked On LSU. He asked me if Jarquez Hunter was the best running back in the SEC. And I just said no, because I felt like there was somebody better. And he said, okay, who's better? And I'm like, I had a hard time coming up with an answer. I said ETN, the new Georgia running back who transferred from Florida. But like, after thinking about that, like, I think I'd rather have Jarquez Hunter. I think he could do more. And so to me, it's like, okay, yeah, he deserves to be an SEC preseason first teamer. Props to you, Jarquez Hunter. And props to Hugh Freeze for championing some of these guys on the big stage that goes out on the SEC network and national television, and that's where all the reporters are. So he talked up Jarquez Hunter consistently, which I love that. Fight for your players. I think that's great. Did that help him get on that list? Possibly. It possibly did. But I don't think Jarquez Hunter should be the only Auburn player on the roster that's a preseason first teamer. Let's stay with the offense first. Rivaldo Fairweather wasn't on the list at all. He didn't make the first team, the second team, or the third team, which is malarkey. That is crap. Like, that doesn't make any sense at all. And the pre-scoring kid, I think I'm saying his name right. Is it Prescorn? Where is it?
Their website says Prescorn.
Yeah, Caden Prescorn, the transfer tight end at Ole Miss. He looks very dynamic. He reminds me of Rivaldo, honestly, just a dynamic, athletic player that's transferring up. Similar situation to what Rivaldo did coming from FIU to Auburn. Lane Kiffin's offense, I think Jackson Dart's going to light it up. I'm okay with that being one. I'm going to push back a little bit for the sake of the conversation, but whatever. That's fine.
30 catches for 449 and 4 touchdowns at Memphis.
Whatever. When you look at
respectable.
Yeah, but like when you look at what Rivaldo did at Auburn last year in a terrible offensive system, and what he did the previous year at FIU, where he was extremely productive and dynamic, it's like, I don't know, but okay, fine, whatever. The other guys that are ahead of Rivaldo, I just don't know how that happened. I don't get it, Lindsay. I just don't get it. One of them's the LSU guy whose name is Mason Taylor. Yeah, which similar stat line to Rivaldo a year ago, but it's like you had a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback throwing to you. You're losing that. I'm very low on LSU this year versus where we were a year ago, but that could just be personal preference and bias, whatever. And then the other guy, sorry, Lindsay, 1 second. Oscar Delp, the Georgia guy, who's literally just the backup of a great tight end a year ago. Like, being a backup to an all-time great doesn't make you better. It just doesn't. It wasn't the system that made Brock Bowers good at Georgia. It just wasn't. It was Brock Bowers that made Brock Bowers good at Georgia. So to me, it's just, I think Rivaldo is better than these two guys. He probably was better than all three, but the voters didn't see it that way.
Yeah, sorry. Mason Taylor in the second team, his stats got worse year over year. And he started one less game in 23 than in 22. But like, yards per game went down. He dropped in touchdowns from 3 to 1. Yards per catch went down. Like, he got a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback and got worse. Right. So feels hard to feel like he should be ahead of Fairweather. And then Oscar Delp literally has 1 year as Brock Bowers is back. Well, 5 catches for 61 yards his first year. And then 24 catches for 284 and 3 touchdowns last year. He averaged 1.7 catches a game and averaged 11.8 yards per catch, which went down also in his second year over his first year. And it's just like,
sure.
How is this guy ahead of Rivaldo Fairweather, who has now done this, it feels like, for 37 years and has a ton of experience? He led the team, set the single season tight end receiving record. Now, Granted, it wasn't an amazing team last year, but just like everybody else, it's a much better situation than it was the year before. And he produced despite that bad situation. Come on here. What are we doing here?
You also have the argument that Rivaldo was forced to play outside wide receiver some just because of he was the only one who stepped up at times last year. And so they were able to put more tight ends on the field because that was a position of strength. Whatever. So that one I think was just a major whiff on the media. The other one, and I'm fine if you don't want to put him at first team. And the way they do this is a little weird because I'm actually not positive if Jalen McLeod was listed as a defensive lineman or a linebacker. I'm assuming he was listed as a linebacker because most of the Bucks and these strong side edges are listed as, or these stand-up defensive ends are listed as linebacker in this. But regardless, if you're going to say there's over 10 guys, whether it's defensive line or linebacker, because Jalen McLeod wasn't listed at all. He didn't make the first, second, or third team. If you're telling me that there's 10 guys at either spot, I don't care if you want to list him as D lineman or a linebacker. But there's not 10 other guys in the conference that are a threat to have a 10-sack season this year, a double-digit sack season like Jalen McLeod is. So to me, that was a major whiff too. I'm not saying he needed to be first team, but to just leave him off the list entirely is a big whiff by the SEC media.
There's actually 13 defensive linemen on these three teams. There's 10 linebackers. And so it's like he's either the 14th best defensive lineman or the 11th best linebacker at best. And that same thing. That feels kind of low. And I mean, some of these guys are guys who are the second or third option at their position. Alabama, Deontay Lawson, first team. Okay, I'm perfectly fine with that. And then Jahad Campbell, third team. And it's like, he's not even the number one guy at his position. Of course, he's going to have a little bit of a better statistical path. Eugene Asante's third team. I think you could have had an argument to have both of these Auburn guys at least on the third team, if not better.
Yeah, because, their roles are just so different. But whatever. And the scary thing about this is based off of where they put Eugene, because he was third team, correct? Eugene Asante was third team?
Third team.
Kind of makes you wonder if Auburn hadn't have taken him, I don't think the SEC the media would have voted him at all. And I think he would have been a snub too, which is ridiculous. It's a joke. It's an absolute joke. So all in all, I want to make sure Rivaldo and Jalen McLeod get their love. I think they deserve to be on that list. As far as what team they needed to be on, you can make that call for yourself. But I think Rivaldo was certainly worthy of first or second team. I think McLeod is probably worthy of second or third team, but whatever. Props to Jarquez Hunter for representing Auburn. And I guess we'll give some love to McPherson for sure, who did get some love as an all SEC preseason kicker, which after not missing a kick a year ago, he is certainly worthy of that 100%.
Yeah, he was the third team place kicker and the first team kickoff specialist. And then Keontae Scott was a third team returner. Keontae Scott feels like he should have been he should have been on the defensive back depth chart somewhere, right?
I wish Keontae Scott would have returned one more punt a year ago.
Makes sense.
That would have been nice.
I'll give it to you.
Nice. Yeah. Oh well. All right, Lindsay, how can people check out everything you've got going on?
I'm on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. You can find the Auburn Baseball writing, auburndaily.com. The Atlanta Braves writing, bravestoday.com.
Yes, you can find all my written work there as well. Please like the video. Please subscribe. We will see you later today. This has been Locked On Auburn.